everyone. Welcome to Grace Every Day, a podcast for Christian wives of blue collar guys. Last episode, I talked about the importance of character development and personal growth and how the best tool for intentional growth was reading. And naturally, the next podcast episode on that topic that came to mind to follow that episode was the one on the most impactful books that I've read. Now, let me say first and foremost, by no means have I read every book out there, not even close. And I may not have even read the best books for growth out there. First of all, because best is going to be pretty subjective here. To someone, best is going to be relative to some degree based on this season of life that you're in, or where you are on your own personal growth journey, what you're going through at the time when you read a particular book. And it's kind of like if you ever noticed you read the Bible and a specific chapter, and then you read that chapter again a couple years later and you get something else out of it. And it's not because the Bible changed, it's because you did. And you have a different mindset, a different perspective the second time around. So that's why the best books do bear rereading, because you're in a different place. So my best may not be your best. And that's just going to be very subjective. And what's interesting is I would be curious, there's no way to know, but I'd be curious to know if the list of books that are my best, quote unquote, would have been different if I had read them earlier or later in my growth journey. There's some books that I read today, I'm like, that wasn't a bad book, that was a good book, but there was nothing new in it for me. So perhaps if I had read that book early in my growth journey, might be the same principles as a different book I read, but it would have touched me differently because it would be something new, right? So again, this list is by no means completely inclusive, and certainly maybe not everybody's list of best books for leadership, personal growth, and development, but there's some pretty good ones on here. So throwing these out as resources that if you haven't read them, I would definitely put them on your list of books to explore next time you're looking for something that will help you personally and professionally. The other thing is I measure best for me in terms of impact. Did I do something different after reading that book? Did it change my perspective in some way? Did I feel compelled to talk about that book with others? Do I remember the lessons from it? I've read so many books, but many of them I don't really remember getting anything from it. I just can't remember the important points. And so that doesn't mean they weren't good books. They just weren't impactful for me, perhaps at that time, perhaps at all, right? Again, when I think of best books, quote unquote, is impact is certainly a strong measure, right? I've probably shared this before, but my personal growth goal is reading 50 nonfiction books a year. And I've done that for quite a few years. I know I've done it since at least 2016, maybe longer than that. 2016 is when I started keeping a list in an Excel spreadsheet. So I know I've done it for at least that long. Again, perhaps earlier, it's just that that's when I started the Excel spreadsheet that lets me go, oh, okay, all of these books I read this year. Before that, I kept up with them in like different places. Like for some years, I had them in like a personal growth file, a resume, anything like that. So 2016 is when I became consistent about collecting those titles. So the challenge these days is finding 50 great nonfiction books every year. And there are a few books that deserve rereading, but not many. But that goal has driven my growth over the years. And so it's a goal I come back to. A couple of years I have reevaluated, is this really still serving me, right? Am I just setting this goal and just, reading books to check a box? Or is this goal really serving my growth? And I come back to every year, yeah. Now, again, finding great books every year can be a challenge, but I find that reading that many of them, I usually get a pretty good quantity of good books. If you think of the 80-20 rule, 20% of my most impactful books every year come from, or 80% of the most impact comes from 20% of the books, right? If I said that right. Yeah, 80% comes from 20%. So when you think about that, if you read one book and you only get, one good quote or good nugget or principle out of it, but if you read 50 books and you get 50 quotes or one out of each book, then you get 50 quotes overall. So you see where I'm going. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to read 50 books every year. And you have to figure out what that goal looks like for you. But my point here is saying that goal has served me well. Now, I still read fiction books as well. I just don't keep track of those. So I don't have any idea how many fiction books I read, but I'm a big fan of Kindle Unlimited because those books, I can pick them up, and if they're not any good, I don't feel bad about not finishing them. The other thing on that, before I get into the books themselves, I I do read a lot of books on my Kindle, particularly fiction, some nonfiction as well, because that Kindle travels really well. And Mac and I are traveling a good bit. And if I'm on an airplane, I can have 3 Kindle books right there at the tip of my fingertips. Or if we're, in a different hotel, I don't have to haul around like an actual stack of books. So that's really helpful. But most of the time, when I'm reading a character development, personal growth book, I like the actual physical book. I get more from the physical book. In fact, sometimes if a book I read is so good and I read it on Kindle first, but it was so good in terms of quotes or highlights that I wanted to make key points, um, then I will order the actual physical hardback or paperback book to have a copy of that as well. Now, I try not to do that as nearly as much these years because, as you can see, I have a lot of books, and Mac has a whole, study full of books as well. And so every time we move, I'm like, wow, I don't know if I really need to keep all of these books. But I find myself going back to them, particularly the ones that are impactful and the ones that I need to share with someone else. And it's fascinating because, again, these days, it's not often that I read a book and go, whoa, that was really new, profound information. But pretty much every time I read a book, I go, ooh, somebody I come across or somebody I know already needs to know of this. And if somebody doesn't come to mind pretty quick within just a couple weeks, I'll have a conversation or a session with someone, or again, someone comes up to me after Mac and I are done speaking, and I'm like, oh wait, I just read a book that would really be helpful for you. So these days, I find that I'm not getting maybe quite as much out of the books that I'm reading, but I'm always getting really great nuggets to pass on. So a different perspective of learning, but it's also challenged me to be more intentional about retaining the lessons that I'm learning, that I'm reading, because then I can be more effective at passing them on. So just a different dimension for my growth as I share. So these books are in no particular order of importance except the first one, because again, order of importance can be very subjective depending on the season of life. And so there was no really way to rank them. So I just started typing them out as they came to mind. But first and foremost, personal growth and development book that I would put on anyone's list is, of course, the Bible. And I probably shouldn't even have to list this one, but I bring that up because this year, I think particularly, I've read the Bible before. I've done those study guides where you read the Bible in one year. I've, read different Bible studies that look at a particular book from the Bible, looking at Bible stories of women, for example. So I've done a lot of that over the years. And what I found this year was just being more intentional about the growth messages in the Bible, if that makes sense. Like, not just reading the Bible cover to cover to say, I read the Bible cover to cover this year, but actually digging into what does this mean? So I ordered a different new Bible study guide this year, and I'm enjoying that as it takes me through the Bible chronologically, not from cover to cover, but the Bible chronologically as it happened. So, we read the first few chapters of Genesis, and then it jumps over to Job, because Job followed pretty quickly after certain first few chapters of Genesis, and then we go back to Genesis. So we're reading the Bible chronologically as it happened, not as it is listed in the books of the Bible in the Bible. So All that to say, going into that Bible reading this year with a different mindset has really just brought some new insights into some of the significance of the occurrences in the Bible, and what does that look like in terms of life today. Because I think in years past, a lot of times I would read books in the Bible and go, that doesn't even feel like it applies to me because it's in such a different time and such a different setting. And reading things from the Old Testament, and then now we have the forgiveness and the grace that Christ brought us. So it's been interesting to just see it from a new lens this year, and maybe with a little more understanding of some of the messages there. So if you haven't picked it up recently, if you haven't done a deep dive study, I would definitely recommend it. I touched on, as I said earlier, sometimes you read the Bible and then years later you go back and you read it with a different perspective because you're different. And perhaps that is just what I'm seeing for me is that I'm in a different place. So first and foremost, the Bible. I would put that on everybody's personal growth and development list. It's a standby, right? And for me, it comes down to internalizing those important messages and that faith perspective, because you can't pour enough good stuff in, because life is hard, and who we are inside is going to naturally come out when life gets tough, right? So you have to be intentional about developing that from a Christian perspective, I think. Moving on, number 2 on my list of personal growth and development books that were most impactful, Like a Rock, Becoming a Person of Character by Andy Stanley. This book was impactful for me in a lot of different ways. He talks a lot about character in this book and his own character growth journey. He touches on like integrity, for example. He talks early on in the book about Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I'll get to. But Andy Stanley shares, when he read that book and it challenged him to set some values for himself. And so he did. And then he realized that he was not necessarily living those values. He uses integrity as an example. And he would always say, I always called myself available, I think is what he says in the book. But then I would hear my secretary say, "Oh, I'm sorry, he's not available right now." And he's like, that isn't the definition of integrity that I want for my life. He said, if I want to say I'm available as a value, then I need to be available, right? So he dug into what integrity meant to him in terms of what we say and what we do, how our words align with behaviors, how our behaviors align with our values. And that book really, his sharing and his journey really helped me think through some of those things for my own journey. And a book, again, this book challenged me to think of what did it mean to be a person of character. We talk about having good character, right? And character is more than just being good or being bad, right? The depth of character is, infinite degrees of who we are as a person and how that affects what we say, do in life, but also how others experience interactions with us in life. And I'd never really thought through, well, what does having good character look like? What does it mean for me to be a person of character? And I realized I still have so much work to do in so many areas, but that's okay. I'm still under construction. We all are, right? And that's all right. We don't have to be perfect here, but just striving, as Michael Josephson said, we don't have to be sick to get better, right? Always striving to get better. So definitely one to put on your list. Now, this book is not available on audiobook or ebook. It is one he wrote quite a few years ago. So they don't have a digital version. They don't have an audio version, which was disappointing. He did release a book, I think it was last year, that had some sections of Like a Rock. And so he kind of republished a smaller version of that. That one is available, but I would highly recommend that you order the old one, order the original. It is well worth it. You can pick up a used one. It doesn't have to be expensive. But definitely, to me, having read both versions, I would say take the time to go order the hardback, paperback version, the real actual book, because he digs into it a lot deeper than the digital version that was recently released. So definitely recommend that. Number 3 on my list, Leadership and Self-Deception. This was written by or released by the Arbinger Institute. And what this book really digs into is the concept of self-betrayal that distorts our perspective in life, the self-deception, if you will. And that arises because we intuitively know the right thing to do in some situations, like helping someone, admitting a mistake, but we choose not to honor that. We choose not to do it. And then we justify that choice by exaggerating other people's faults and inflating our own virtues and blaming external circumstances. So that book was a paradigm shifter in so many ways. It uses the analogy of being in the box, and that means viewing other people as objects or obstacles rather than people with legitimate needs, thoughts, feelings, emotions similar to ourselves, right? Rather than viewing people as people, we view people as objects when we're in the box. And how we get in the box is, again, intuitively knowing the right thing to do and not honoring that. Really great examples in the book. The book itself is a fictional story about a corporate executive and his own journey to realizing he's in the box as he started a new job. It was a very good story, but it made for easy reading. Sometimes when we put those principles into a narrative or a story like that, it's easier to read and absorb and understand. And so really well done. And again, paradigm shifting book for me on so many different levels. Even to this day, I'll catch myself thinking like, did I honor that intention? Do I feel like I should do something? There's some little examples like stopping an elevator door when somebody's running up to get on it. And do you push the door hole button because you should, or do you let it go and then on the way up you tell yourself, well, I'm tired or I'm in a hurry or they can catch the next one, right? Just a great example of how we start to justify and make ourselves look better in our own eyes. Really profound principle when we start to think about that. Cannot recommend that book enough. The audio is great as well, but that's another one that I really enjoyed reading the physical book because I can highlight and underline and dog ear the pages and make some notes. So number 4 on my list, The Road Back to You by Ian Cron and Suzanne Stabile. This book really talks about the Enneagram, which the Enneagram has been around for thousands of years, right? There are many great books on the Enneagram. This one just really, number one, explained it in a way that I really could understand it and retain it much easier. It didn't give me a lot of aha insights in my own personality. And some of that is because I was already aware of my own Enneagram personality type. Over the years, I've done many personality studies and personality assessments and things like that. So I didn't get a super lot of aha moments of self-awareness from this book, but I did get an incredible amount of insights relative to other people who are close to me, other relationships that are close to me, like my relationship with Mac, for example, his Enneagram type, and how that related to our relationship, but also the different Enneagram types. It talks about how that person is, how they present, how they show up when they are healthy and when they're not healthy. And so it gave me, again, a lot of insight, not really as much for myself, but other relationships that are close to me and how that affects my interactions with them, my understanding, and my ability to see and empathize from their perspective went up exponentially. Don't always get it right, of course. That's still an area that I continue to work on, but it gave me a great tool in actually understanding sometimes the motivations for other people's behavior. Number 5, The 5 Levels of Attachment by Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. This book started off a little weird for me, and and how he opens up the book. But the levels of attachment themselves, and the concept behind them is incredibly profound. He talks about how we as people, number one, form attachments, and then how we create an identity around those attachments. And I'll use an example he used from the book: sports. If you are, for example, have a level one attachment to a soccer game, and somebody invites you to a soccer game, you're not a soccer fan, you show up, you can enjoy the game. It doesn't matter who wins, it doesn't matter who loses. You're just there for the experience. Again, just wholeheartedly enjoying the experience and not attached to one particular side. You don't have any level of identity wrapped up in a particular fan of a certain team or anything like that. So that's a healthy level of attachment, right? Level two, maybe somebody invites you to the soccer game and you're like, well, I like red. I like the color red, so I'm going to cheer for the people with the red jerseys on. You still enjoy the game. It's not an unhealthy level of attachment. It doesn't matter who wins or loses beyond, yeah, I kind of liked them a little better because they were wearing red. Well, level three, level of attachment, the game starts to change, no pun intended. At level three, maybe you are a soccer fan and you call yourself, I don't even know soccer teams game. So I don't know a sports team name to even throw out there, but let's invent one. Let's say that you are a Tigers fan and your team is playing and somebody invites you to go to the game with them. And at this level, you call yourself a Tigers fan, right? And so now you are a lot more attached to or invested in whether they win or lose, because you have some level of identity that is attached to being a fan of theirs. And so now the game changes. It's not I went to the soccer game and one team won or lost. It's, I went to the soccer game and my team lost. The referee made a bad call on us. So you start to see how language shifts with that level of attachment going up in terms of identity. I'm attached to my identity as a soccer fan. Well, level four, that's when you see people who their level of attachment to that soccer fan, that soccer team as a fan, is unhealthy. And if their team loses, it wrecks their weekend. You're like, man, I needed that. I needed them to win. We needed that win so bad and they lost. And, then you have a bad day or a bad weekend and you're mad. And level five is where we see people who have an unhealthy level of attachment to the degree that they will get in a fight or they will, physically harm somebody over the outcome of a sports game, right? That's not a healthy level of attachment. Now, when we talk about sports, it's easy to see that. But when you apply that concept to something like religion or politics, or any other dimension of identity, any other possibility of identity, you start to see how we as people, A, form these attachments, but B, how that can interfere with our relationships, with our influence with other people, and our ability to build trust and influence in relationships. So really insightful book. Challenged me in some ways to sit down and think about what identity have I built for myself, and where is that showing up in unhealthy ways? Do I have an unhealthy or healthy relationship to my identity as a runner, for example? And so really starting to think about that for ourself. Again, level of attachment and the self-awareness insight that brought was definitely impactful. So definitely recommend that one. Number 6, The Power of Moments. This book, it's kind of one of those books that there were some great insights in it, but you don't necessarily know how that applies to your life, for example, until you get almost to the end of the book. And then the authors do a good job of walking through, okay, here's how you can apply this. And the concept being a powerful moment stands out in our mind, a defining moment, a peak moment, like when, something really great happened, that's a peak moment. A bad moment where something negative or something bad happened. We tend to remember the peaks and we tend to remember the valleys. We tend to remember the defining moments. We tend to remember the moments that connect us to others, that deepen our relationships. We tend to remember moments that were unexpected and full of surprises, but we don't remember every moment in our life. Our brain just simply remembers kind of the highlights, the highs, the lows, the unexpecteds, right? So, all that to say, whether you're an organization or a person, you can leverage that concept. From a business standpoint, how do you have your customers experience peak moments when they interact with your business? Disney, for example, right? What are the things that they do that you think back to that vacation that says, oh, wow, it was worth spending thousands of dollars to go have that experience? If you had to stand in line for 3 hours, you're going to remember that. That can be a valley moment. That could be a negative moment. But what are they doing to offset that so that when you look back, you go, oh, yeah, I had to stand in line, but it was so worth it because of the XYZ experience, right? So it gives some great examples, some great customer service examples. But one really powerful example that stuck with me was giving the an analogy of two different first day on the job experiences. So one example A was the person gets hired, they show up for their first day on the job. And this one I could so relate to. Maybe it's an organization, maybe it's a big organization. And so, it's difficult to even not get lost as you're navigating hallways and maybe multiple floors, and you find the office that you saw 3 weeks ago when you were, giving the job interview. But, you had some anxiety going in. Am I just going to be able to navigate and get to the office? And then where's the bathroom going to be? And, how do I get to the cafeteria at lunchtime? So, and that's not an atypical experience for a large organization and a new employee, a new hire. And then you do find the office and you sit down and there's a computer on the desk, but you don't have a keyboard. And so you don't know, you can't even turn the computer on. You don't have a keyboard. And then your email hasn't been set up because the IT department hasn't gotten around to setting up your email account, right? And so, again, all of these little moments for that first day on the job and how that impacts us as people. And then they compare that with example B. And I think the example company they used was John Deere. And it was a specific, like one smaller division of John Deere. It maybe wasn't the company wide, but this one particular division trialed a program where they had a incredible first day experience for their team members. So the team member would come in their first day at work. Somebody would meet them right at the door and escort them to their desk. The desk was already, working and functional, and their email was ready to go. And they sit down at the desk, and the first thing that pops up on their computer is a personalized video from the director welcoming them. Hey, John, whatever your name is, welcome to the most incredibly important work you'll ever do here at John Deere, and here's why. Or, hey, Susan, thank you so much for coming on board with our team. Welcome to the most important work that we do here at John Deere, because what you do matters in terms of the farmer's experience or whatever. And so it was just this incredible moment where that brand new team member felt welcomed, they felt seen, they felt valued, and they felt like the work they do mattered. And it was crazy because the leadership and the culture that was reflected in that particular division thought so much enough of that peak moment, right? The first day on the job, to make sure it was a peak moment and not a valley moment. So really great examples, but the book goes into personal applications. What does that mean in terms of our relationships as a couple, right? How do using the power of moments affect us as a couple? How does it affect us with an extended family, with children? And something that I did differently after that book was I put some thought into the power of moments just with family and vacations. So just putting a little more thought and intention into those little moments that hopefully make vacation moments stand out. So every time we go on vacation, I put together like a little goodie bag with some small treats in it. And it doesn't have to be big, but just some little treats that says, hey, I thought about you and I want to set the tone for a fun, memorable vacation, right? For Mac, it's usually chocolate. He's a big chocolate fan. Or like last year, we took Mac's mom, my mother-in-love, because I love that term so much better than mother-in-law. We took her to Utah for some sightseeing, and we knew we were going to be in the car a lot of driving. And so, especially when in the desert, when it's hot, you always carry water. So I got her this just insulated mug, one of those 30-ounce insulated mugs. And I just put a whole bunch of her favorite Crystal Light flavor in there. So those little Crystal Light packets, right? So she always had her favorite Crystal Light flavor in an insulated mug the whole 5-day trip or whatever. Those aren't big things, right? But hopefully it communicated just that intentionality and leveraging the power of moment. That first day of vacation when she is equipped and ready to go on to enjoy the experience. This year we went to the beach with our son Eric and his new bride. So we're super excited to welcome her to the family. And I got them just a little gift bag with some snacks, some coconut water, and got some aromatherapy lotion for stress relief. I got her a little belt bag that just will come in handy for some of those beach walks, right? Little things. But with people, the little things and the little moments can be big. So definitely recommend that book. Maybe not one of my top 5, maybe most impactful, but definitely appreciated the concepts and how that translated into interactions with other people. Number 7, super communicators. This was written by Charles Duhigg, and he wrote The Power of Habit several years ago. Super communicators is much newer. Loved this book because it had some great insights in the different types of conversations. And he talks about in this book, there are really only 3 types of conversations. 1 is, what's this about? Number 2 is, how do we feel? Number 3, who are we? And so, every conversation that we have falls into one of those 3 different categories. And then he also digs into how super communicators are more effective at personal interactions, how they ask questions that offer opportunity to share feelings, and how they leverage open-ended questions to invite vulnerability, and how that increases influence. And he gave a great example of interviews for positions like astronauts, and how they got really good at measuring applicants for astronaut positions based on what the person would share in the interview, how they asked the questions, how the person responded to a joke, for example. He goes into how super communicators match energy levels and how that builds trust in relationships. So again, recommend that one. Just very insightful in terms of how our communication impacts influence. Number 8, last and not least, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. As Dr. Stephen Covey wrote this book, it's a bit of a read. For sure. Like, you have to sit down and really dig into this book. The audio version, I really like the 6-hour audio version personally, because it takes a lot of the highlights from the book and doesn't take nearly as long to read. But for me, that was the version that I got a lot out of. The 6-hour audio version covered enough depth about the habits to give you some ahas, but not so much that you were just like falling asleep reading it, right? And it can be, again, it's a mouthful to dig into that book. So you have to be committed to reading that. It's not an easy read. Very powerful. The 7 habits themselves, when applied, are incredibly powerful personally and professionally. The interesting thing about this is they also have a teens version. The teens version to me was perhaps even better, again, because it was not such an intense read. And there is a workbook that goes with that. There's also the 7 habits for happy kids, which really helps, if you have young children, it really helps have those conversations and get that language early on to learning, understanding, and applying the 7 habits of highly effective people. Like, be proactive, right? Putting first things first, begin with the end in mind. So really, really helpful. And again, several different versions. There's even one for, I think it's just the audio, but I think there's even one for 7 habits of highly effective marriages. So I would definitely dig into that. If you haven't picked up that book ever, or if you haven't picked it up in a long time, might be time to revisit that. Again, reading for the different perspective. This book was most impactful, incredibly impactful in my journey, and Max as well. He shares a lot about that. So there you go. 8 of the top best resources that I know of for personal growth and character development to help you up-level your success, right? Personally and professionally. It's human nature for us to want more, and recognizing we have to take ownership and responsibility for, what do I need to do differently? What do I need to change? How can I change how I think so that that changes what I do? So that's going to change the rest of my life. And remember, life can be tough, but God's grace is always enough. Until next time.